Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart, a podcast where we do our best to own our stories, love ourselves, and thrive as we become more mentally stable, emotionally healthy, and physically well with each passing day. I'm MommaFoxFire, and today we're talking about something I know way too much about from personal experience, and that is self-sabotage. Specifically, how it shows up in creative and educational spaces, and why people in those fields seem to be especially good at getting in their own way. Let me paint you a picture of what self-sabotage actually looks like in real life. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. It's you with 82 browser tabs open, convincing yourself you're being productive while you accomplish absolutely nothing. It's spending 3 hours researching the perfect way to start a project instead of just starting the project. It's telling yourself you're too tired to work on that thing you claim to care about, but somehow having enough energy to doom scroll for 45 minutes. And here's the thing about self-sabotage that makes it so insidious. It doesn't even feel like sabotage. It feels reasonable or justified. Your brain is really good at selling you on why now isn't the right time, or why you need to do more research first, or why you should probably wait until conditions are perfect. Creative people and educators deal with this constantly. If you're a teacher, you're pouring energy into people who might not appreciate what you've given them until years down the road. You might change someone's entire life trajectory and never even know it. There's no immediate feedback loop. There's no review where students come back years later and say, hey, that thing you taught me in 3rd grade literally changed my career path. And if you're in a creative field, forget about it. You're putting yourself out there over and over, hoping someone will respond, hoping your work matters. You post something you spent hours on and it gets crickets. Then 3 months later, someone tells you it changed their perspective. But in the meantime, you've already decided you're terrible at what you do. That absence of validation feeds imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome feeds self-sabotage. Because if you don't really try, if you're self-sabotaging just enough, then when things don't work out, you can tell yourself it's because you didn't give it your all, not because you actually failed. It's a protection mechanism. Your brain is trying to keep you safe, but safe doesn't equal happy. Safe doesn't equal fulfilled. Safe just means you stay exactly where you are. The other thing that happens in creative and educational spaces is that you're expected to be passionate about what you do. And when you're struggling with anxiety or burning out or sabotaging yourself, there's this added layer of guilt because you're supposed to love this. You chose this. So what's wrong with you that you can't just push through? Nothing is wrong with you. That's not how human beings work. Anxiety in these fields is complicated because some nervousness is normal. Some amount of, oh God, I hope this goes well, is just part of putting yourself out there. But there's a line between healthy nerves and the kind of anxiety that keeps you up at night or stops you from doing your work at all. Perfectionism is another trap that creative people and educators fall hard into. And perfectionism is sneaky because it masquerades as caring about quality. But really, it's just fear dressed up in professional clothing. If it has to be perfect, and you know it can never be perfect, then you never have to finish. You never have to put it out there. You never have to risk it being not good enough. Today, my guest is Dr. Albert Bramante. He's a performance psychologist, certified hypnotist, and talent agent who has spent more than 20 years helping people in creative and educational spaces work through exactly this kind of mental gridlock. He specializes in anxiety, imposter syndrome, and self-sabotage. And he doesn't just work with these concepts theoretically. He has been in the trenches. He represents actors. He is an actor. He teaches college students. He knows what it actually looks like when talented people get stuck. We're going to talk about what's really happening underneath procrastination and perfectionism. We're going to talk about why teachers and performers are especially vulnerable to these patterns. And we're going to get into some practical things you can actually do when you notice yourself spiraling. This conversation went wide. We talked about grief and trauma and the myth of multitasking. We talked about browser tabs and dopamine addiction and why asking for help is so hard. Albert shared some tools from his work with hypnosis and NLP, and we get into what it actually takes to break these cycles. If you've ever felt like you're your own worst enemy, if you've ever wondered why you can't seem to get out of your own way, this episode and this conversation is for you. Let's get into it. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Mental Health Monday. I am super excited to have you guys here. I see you already in the chat interacting. That is wonderful. If you have any questions while we are here live, feel free to pop those into the chat and I'll make sure that we address them because we are here for a live Q&A. We are going to be talking about addressing self-sabotage and anxiety, and specifically in creative and educational spaces. And I am joined today by Dr. Albert Bramante. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. I'll tell you guys a little bit about Dr. Bramante. He is a performance psychologist, certified hypnotist, and talent agent who spent more than 20 years helping people in both creative and educational spaces work through mental roadblocks. He specializes in tackling anxiety, imposter syndrome, and self-sabotage, blending tools like hypnosis, NLP, and mindset coaching with the everyday realities performers and educators face. He also teaches creators and teachers how to use AI in ways that reduce burnout and boost productivity. And he's been featured on shows like Books 101 and No Half Cakes. So I'm really excited to dig into his insights today and what really kind of gets in your way and how we can move forward with more confidence and balance. So, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. And Quantum, I see you have an exclamation point cue. So if you've got a question, feel free to just drop it in there and we'll get it addressed. But thank you guys again just for being here early, and for being ready to dig into this. Albert, I would love to know what drew you into working with performers and educators specifically instead of just staying in traditional psychology settings.
Well, thank you again for inviting me to be here. I'm happy
Yeah.
to share the space with you and the audience. So I always was an educator by heart, and I grew up in a family where my mom was a school teacher for 31 years, teaching kindergarten and first grade. My father was a football coach. My older brother was a football coach. So I did the combination of having a teacher and coaches in my family, kind of let it into my blood. So I always felt like teaching is in my blood as an educator, and that's where it really started initially. Now, I started off initially, studying traditional psychology, and that was going to be my goal: is I'm going to be a clinical psychologist, get a PhD, do this research, and I really knew this in high school because in high school I was reading books like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I was reading, which is a great book, by the way. I also was reading Feeling Good by David Burns and Seven Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey. Not typical things that a 15 or 16-year-old would read. I was a little bit of at the time, it's called the odd kid out, in a sense, because
Yeah.
I grew up in a family of I'm the youngest of 5, a lot of older brothers. They were very much into sports. I could care less about sports. I was more of a reader, a thinker, an intellect, and so the library was like my sanctuary growing up.
I love that. I love libraries, just in general.
Yeah, and so that was definitely a one thing that I really, felt part of, in a sense. Books become my sanctuary, reading a lot of books, and because I started reading books about human behavior and human performance, that I was really like, this is something I want to do. Now, I was also in high school and college, I was involved in a lot of organizations and clubs, one of them being a drama club in high school. And then I was also took some acting and theater classes in college. And I really loved hanging out with like the theater kids at the time. It was like these are fun people in a sense. So I just felt, really, at home there with that. So that's sort of like the what kind of got me into, like, because watching the performance side of things and,
Mhm.
being a teacher, being an educator. And then I found myself working in New York City because that's where I'm based, I'm in New Jersey, based in also work in New York. So right around the time of 9/11, which is unfortunate, I found myself doing a lot of volunteer work in crisis prevention counseling. And then I was like, meeting actors and producers and directors they were giving that and also working. I said, this is my people. And I did a little bit of acting myself. Most people who work in the entertainment industry will, did a little bit of that stuff. It really wasn't for me, but I like being on set. I like helping people. I like helping actors. So that's what I did. I decided I was going to really help actors out more in a sense. And so that's where so I'm going to open up my first company, a talent agent. And the one thing that I noticed, because at this time I was also just got hired to teach part time in college, being an adjunct instructor in psychology, and then also building my agency. The one thing that I kept seeing happening in both areas was self-sabotage. A lot of performers were self-sabotaging. I had students that were really talented that were self-sabotaging. And so a lot of that kind of like led me down to this path. It's like, well,
Yeah.
why is this happening? Now, I was still initially interested in being a clinical psychologist, but I decided I wanted to mainly when I came down with dissertation, I said I'd love to do it on actors. Why, self-defeating behavior in performing arts. And so that's where I did my dissertation on.
That's really cool. You kind of just brought it all together.
Yes, absolutely. Everything came full circle, and it was a way to combine both fields. But that's in a nutshell, because I kind of worked in both fields as an educator and as, working with actors as an agent, I noticed a lot of self-sabotaging patterns were happening, and so that's kind of led me down the path of like, well, let me maybe open up as a performance mindset coach.
Yeah. Very cool. So, Quantum has a question in the question queue, and that is, what is performance psychology? Is that related to performers and creatives?
Well, performance psychology is really about, really looking at the mental side of performing, the mindset, the growth mindset, working with, helping people really give the best performance. And of course, it's training, technical training, yes, is important, but so is your mindset.
Mm.
Where do you see yourself identity wise? What headspace are you in? So performance psychology really looks at how do we help performers maximize their fullest potential by, removing any mental blocks or any blocks or that, could be holding your self-confidence back.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Coyote's got a great kind of addition to that, is just like, is that something that deals with stage fright as well?
Yes. And really transforming stage fright. So, one of the things about a lot of people ask is, how do I get rid of stage fright?
Yeah.
And the one thing I would like to maybe offer a perspective is that if you look at physiologically the symptoms of fright, it's the butterflies in your stomach, the elevated heart rate, maybe elevated body temperature. That's also the same signs of excitement.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's what I would say, not get rid of stage fright. Let's transform it into excited. So when you start to experience some sensations, look at it more like you're excited to be there, because it's almost impossible to have no feeling going up there and doing anything when you're performing. So I would like to say it's more about transforming the stage fright into excitement.
Yeah. I like that, and that's something that has worked for me in the past, because I actually am a very nervous public speaker, believe it or not. And that's one of the things that I tell myself before I go on a stage in front of people is like, okay, you're feeling these feelings. It's perfectly natural to be excited to go on here and
Yeah,
talk about something that you're so passionate about. And the other thing I would add is just like, have a hype man. When I
yeah,
went and gave a talk at a local college a few years ago, and I can't tell you how much it meant to me to have one of my coworkers there to be like, "I'm so pumped for you. You're gonna do so good at this. Everybody's so, like, ready for you to get out there, and you're gonna represent us really well," and all this stuff. And it was great. It was fantastic. Like, just having someone there
yeah.
who's there to just hype you up a little bit, because then you get into that excited mindset as well.
Of course, and that's when you're excited, that's a positive spin to it.
Yeah.
So, like, when people, I talk, I go talk for a living, as a college professor, but I also speak on stage. I don't know. People ask me, "Are you nervous?" No, I'm excited, and that is a change. I don't experience stage fright anymore,
Yeah.
and because it's excitement. I'm excited to be on stage. So, because I think a lot of times we see these physiological sensations and then we automatically think it's fear, but it can be excitement at the same time. It's exciting. So if we look at it like that, I think that's important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What do you love about working with educators and performers, and what do you hate about it? Or if hate is too strong a word, what are the biggest challenges?
So, I would say kind of like both the same thing, the people. Working a lot of times, I would say the good thing with both students and with actors is to see them passionate about doing what they're doing and to really be happy with what they're doing. And they kind of help, see a light bulb sometimes go off and help them down the path of like really reaching their fullest potential. I would say the thing that I don't like is when I see stubbornness in people. It's like
Ah,
there's some actors that aren't coachable,
mm,
like yet, or they're not ready yet. Or even some students that are not really there for feedback. They don't really want to be that there. And they're not necessarily open to feedback. So part of it is like you have to be coachable.
yeah. Are there particular traits? Is it just stubbornness that makes someone not coachable? Are there other traits that make someone less than coachable?
I would say the main thing is being agreeable and being able to at least be open to feedback and willing to try out new things.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we're so bent on in doing the thing we want to do in the way we want to do it, and sometimes it's the art of letting go that maybe that way may not be the best way to do it.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Do you have this sounds a little bit unrelated, but do you have a true crime story that fascinates you?
Yeah. Um, I go for the heavy stuff. Um, I just this weekend watched the newest Netflix installment of Monster, the
Mm,
Ed Gein story. That was amazing, to
mhm.
watch. So I would say like stuff like that. I also watched, the Dahmer series that they did a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I would say that that's kind of what it's based on. Yes, it is a little sensationalized, but because it's TV, it's for episodic TV, but at the same time, it's just interesting to see how disturbed people can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And those stories, I mean, of course they bring in the big views because they're these big sensational things, right? But they're really fascinating once you get into the details and just the person behind everything that happened and what happened to them also. It's really fascinating.
Well, I kind of, of course, what they did was absolutely horrific. People that did some gruesome things, but you also kind of see the human side of it. It's like, you know, they were tortured and abused themselves horrifically.
Yep.
So it kind of brings a human element to it. Again, not condoning at all what they've done. And, what they did was very horrific things. And they should, obviously they got punishments that they,
Yes.
so called. But you get to see the human side of things and
Mhm.
how really the limits we have.
Yeah. Yep. Well, getting on to our topic tonight, if y'all have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat and we'll make sure to address them here. But do you see common themes between what artists and teachers struggle with, or are the challenges in those two professions just very unique or different?
I mean, there's some things, that are similar. I mean, artists, struggle a lot with forming an identity. You know, the profession of looking for work is so hard,
Yeah.
because it's such an awful competitive, highly competitive field. There's at least four or 500,000 actors in the United States, and only 2 or 3% of them are working at any given moment. So there's a bit of a struggle there.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of work happening. But I would say, the main thing there is leave yourself out. Now, teachers burnout is an issue that often happens because of, there's a lot of things that are outside your control, bureaucracy, administration, and then of course lack of resources. And sometimes you're not able to help everybody. And that can be, sorts of a burnout there. And then even sometimes, imposter syndrome can come up there too, because it's like,
Mm.
Am I
Mm.
really doing what I set out to do? Am I really being an educator? Or am I just, being a pencil pusher or, you know, just filling it and doing paperwork?
Yeah. It can be hard, right? Especially if teaching is your passion. My oldest is going to school to be a teacher and he really wants to teach, and it's like he's so passionate about it. And then once you get into that, it's like, okay, well, I'm passionate about it. Am I qualified for it? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing these kids justice? And like all these kinds of thoughts and challenges come into your head. And I feel like anyone who's being a teacher is doing way more than I ever would be willing to do. So
Of course, absolutely. It's definitely you go. I would say for both professions, and one thing that is kind of like similar, you don't go into it for the money.
yeah.
If you're looking to make money, these are two professions not, you know, gonna happen. But it's more about doing what you love, and that's the end of the day what's important.
Yeah, yeah. Now, when you say artists or creatives, you mentioned acting. Do you work with folks outside of acting as well? A painter or producers
Not as an
even,
agent,
or
not as an
yeah.
agent, not as an agent. I only represent actors, but really anybody who needs mindset work. I was a coach, and really anybody who's, in the field of putting themselves out there. So even if that is a painter who may be struggling with their own identity, because a lot of times, what's especially unique with artists or creatives, a lot of family pressure. Sometimes you could be in a
Mm,
family that doesn't support your creativity. Why couldn't you be a doctor, or why can't you do this or that, or something that makes money?
yeah.
And so there's a lot of pressure, but at the end of the day, you have to do what you love to do.
Mm, yeah. Is there we already kind of talked about this, but I wanna dig in a little bit more. What's the difference between healthy nerves and that excitement before performing or teaching versus real anxiety?
Healthy nerves are typically like when an event comes up, like you're about to go on stage or you're an hour beforehand, the nerves come up, but you can talk yourself through it. Real anxiety is like almost 24/7.
Yeah.
We're to a point where you can't even focus. And very often there's a doom sense of it. The fact that everything you start focusing what can go wrong and what has gone wrong in your life, and you start ruminating. That's definitely unhealthy anxiety.
Yeah.
When it prevents you from you really or stopping you from doing what you're supposed to be doing or doing what you love. Simple jitters is okay. Again, and you could transform that into excitement. But if it's something that's crippling, that's when it may be time to get, a coach or a therapist that can kind of help through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Coyote, this is a good one. I like it. Here's a little dad joke for you. Coyote says, "I wanna be a Commodian, but all my jokes flush."
That's a good one. Like,
That's fantastic.
hats off to you.
Yep. I'm a dad joke lover, by the way. So if you have more, I will love every single one of them. I make my kids groan as often as I can. Most definitely. So from your perspective, why are performers and educators in particular, why are they especially vulnerable to that sabotage and to that anxiety?
Well, because especially with performers, you have to put yourself out there and be vulnerable. That's a big one, and that's hard. And especially, but there's no guarantees that you're going to get the job, or no guarantees that you're going to get the job. The thing with and also with educators, it's you get sometimes you get a lot of criticism too that's unwarranted. Especially from parents or from society. I remember like I would hear talks about on TV and other sometimes talking heads that would
Mhm.
talk about like teachers and educators being like too rich and too greedy, and I laugh at that. I'm like, well, where am I? Maybe I'm teaching in the wrong areas. I don't
Yeah.
know, where the richness happening. So, you know, and the same thing with actors, because a lot of people, when the strikes were going on,
Mhm.
Screen Actors Guild strike and the Writers Guild strike in 2023, even other people are like, oh, well, actors can really be comfortable. They have one job. I'm like, do you know what it really takes? And that you can have a really successful job and still not, have enough money to pay rent, and that. So I think the reality, a lot of times it's dealing with, sometimes gentle ignorance from society about like
Mhm.
what the job entails and getting criticism, getting slack for that.
Yeah,
So that's why I think there's that vulnerability too.
right. Well, and if you're part of the just general public and what you're seeing are folks who are on all of these engagement and they happen to also be college professors or something, but their money isn't coming from being a college professor.
That money may be coming from the working for Fortune 500 companies or,
Yes. Or
consulting work.
yeah, or social media views. There's lots of
Yeah,
ways to earn money through social media. And so I think that if you're seeing that 0.5% of educators who are out there and showing how much they make or whatever.
but
First of all, it's
yeah,
not from education and it's not the majority.
no, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's not at all the majority, but
Yeah.
ultra minority.
Yep.
And maybe it's oftentimes the people that were educated but now are administrators, and they've got those
Mhm.
cushy salaries there. Because even, as a college professor, which I've been, I can assure you that it's not what anybody thinks it is.
Yeah.
Because people say, I've heard, I've laughed, when people said, "Oh, you're a college professor, you must be rich," and I laugh. I'm like, "Yeah, okay. Tell me where I need to be teaching at because
Yeah.
it's not here." But yeah, that's what I would definitely say. I even had students who would tell me that, like, "Oh, these college professors are rich." I'm like, I don't know where you think that's at, but
Mhm.
so that's kind of funny sometimes when I hear that
Yeah.
expression.
Yeah. Well, they make more than an elementary school teacher, but also they had to complete more schooling and
And that's even debatable because it depends if you're a part-time or full-time professor. Those
yeah.
are, two different things. So, but yeah, it really boils down to it. Really at the end of the day, I think it's like what society's expectations of us
Mhm.
and what the reality is. And it's even at the talent age, and a lot of people who are not in the industry think, "Oh, you're in a very exciting field." Now it is fun, it is exciting, but a lot of people think, "Oh, you must go to all these great parties and all these extravagant events." Yeah, maybe 1 every 2 years, if you think
Mhm.
about it. Most of my time, I'm, like, pulling my hair out sometimes, like, we're burying the midnight oil. It's I love what I do, but it's not what you think, and I think sometimes that is what can boil down to, is that there's sometimes a lot of hard work, and you may not necessarily see a return right away, which can burn a lot of people out,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you don't see returns all the time in what you're doing.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, NATO Shido says teachers honestly should receive six figures. They influence the lives of our future. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, I would say that too. Professors do a lot, but seriously, and it's just recognition. We just want respect, and a lot of times, I think with educators, we're kind of like the first to blame. It's like all of these teachers are unreasonable. And I'm not going to lie, there are bad apples everywhere,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of it has to do with you know a negative perception sometimes on
Mhm.
the work we do, and that can add up over time. Especially if you're not really entirely confident in your own abilities, and you're easily persuadable by outside things.
We were just talking a couple of weeks ago with another guest, and we were specifically talking about SEL and how teachers are getting so much pressure on them to be like, don't do this in your classroom and make sure you're still doing this. And there's so much pressure to do the right thing in a classroom and so much focus on well, what is happening in the classroom. And
Yeah,
it's a stressful
or
job.
making sure you meet this metric and that metric and this test and that test. And sometimes what makes it really difficult, and I'm going to say it, is sometimes these people that are making these decisions haven't been in the classroom in years. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, don't really know what it's like. You have no idea what it's like, and now, thankfully, at the college level, we have less of that. We
Hmm.
have something called academic freedom, which kind of why I like you'll never see me teaching in elementary, secondary school. because I like the fact that I can pretty much do what I want. As
Yeah.
long as I'm, teaching the subject matter, I'm pretty much free to do as I please,
Yeah.
because of things like academic freedom.
From your experience, when someone is stuck in self-sabotage, whether that's procrastination or negative self-talk or perfectionism, what's usually going on there underneath the surface?
A lot of it is fear. And the one thing that we're seeing with perfectionism and procrastination and all that is even unresolved childhood trauma that may need to be dealt with. And that's really procrastination and perfectionism are symptoms of that.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily, and I mean, we all procrastinate from time to time, but I'm talking like chronic procrastinators or chronic perfectionists because they're very related. They're highly related, more
Mhm.
so than they're different. Because very often we want things to be perfect, and because we know it may never get there, we never do it, or we take forever to do something. So we procrastinate because we want perfectionism, and so that can certainly be, a hindering thing. Well, with self sabotage, the big thing is fear, and a lot of times to keep us protected, from that fear, what better way to stay stagnant and to stay unproductive or unachieving, a non-achiever, because you're safe at least and you're comfortable at
Yeah.
least. So, and that leads to why we procrastinate and why we are, and this is where I say perfectionism and trauma, because on a conscious level, you may say, well, I really do want things to be right. And that's true to some level, but are you really saying that genuinely, or are you saying that because you're afraid of doing something?
If you're not sure that something is gonna be perfect, I'm absolutely guilty of this. If I'm not sure if I can do something perfectly, sometimes I would rather just be like, "Well, I'm not gonna do it."
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait and wait and wait and wait and research and research and research and research and look and look and look and look and try and figure out, how to do it absolutely perfectly the first time before I even start. And then it winds up
Yes.
being too late to even well, not too late to even start, but way later than I should have started.
Absolutely. Of course. Of course. Of course.
Are there red flags people should watch for to kind of have a signal that they are holding themselves back?
Well, like if you always feel like nothing can be done right, and you're always feel like you're stuck, you haven't been moving the needle. Like every month, you're in the same spot you were last time, or at the end of every year. Because usually, what I like to do, is at the end of every year, kind of do you know, a, a a recap or an inventory of what we've done.
Mhm.
And if you find yourself in the constant focus of like not moving forward, then that's a big red flag. Because every year you should be getting better and better and more evolved and moving, becoming more advanced in what you're doing. And if that's not happening, then that might be something where you're holding yourself back.
Do you recommend like a more periodic check besides just once a year, or is once a year probably a good enough? Or is it like oh, you're new to this, check in more often, you've done it for a while, you could probably step back. Is there any sort of guideline?
Well, I would say the minimum is a year, but you should be doing every month, some sort of check in, like, okay, where am I going? And, am I stay if you've been having if we were just in like periods of time where you're just coasting along, then that might be an indication that you may need to work on something, signifying that something is deeper going on here.
Yeah. We talked about the fear versus excitement. How does someone know if they are self-sabotaging versus procrastinating because they're just really tired or overwhelmed with something?
Well, I mean, procrastination is definitely a form of self-sabotage,
Mm.
100%. And there's nothing wrong with being tired, but if you find yourself always being tired, is that your brain's way of maybe fooling you and keeping you safe and keeping you comfortable by giving you the excuse that you're tired? Because it's very easy to talk yourself out of doing things you're not comfortable with. Very easy to do that. You can easily talk yourself out of doing them. I'm too tired. It's too cold. It's too warm. It's too late. It's too early. Whatever it is, your brain will do a great job in talking you out of doing things that you're scared of. And so sometimes it's like better to have the no, like no, I'm doing this regardless. of how I feel. And, that's where, like, if it's a repeated pattern, then that's where it's an insight that you're not tired, it's an illusion.
One of the comments in the chat, Nato Shido says, sadly, there's the third option as their boss requires minutes per client and job and software may be lacking. Yeah, I mean, you could definitely deal with some roadblocks, right? You could have some things that are in the way of you
Mhm.
getting better at something or of you completing something.
I mean, obviously day-to-day job, when you're on the clock, of course, and you're working for a company, yes, you have to do what your boss tells you to do, and that's
Mhm.
part of, like, that. So, but the conversation that I would then start to have is, are you working overtime? Do you find yourself working a lot of overtime? That may be a conversation worth reflecting on. Why are you taking so much overtime work? Are you doing to escape something, run away from something? Because it's also another defense mechanism for anxiety is I'm burning myself on my job. And I'm burning myself into my work because my work is so important. And I'm not saying it isn't important, but you find yourself sometimes taking on extra projects and extra work. That may be a sign too that you
Yeah.
burn because you're actually going to burn yourself out, believe it or not, even if you love what you do. Too much of anything is not good. And there needs to be balance and moderation.
These are great comments too. Spending 30 minutes per task or 15 minutes or 3 minutes with ADHD, it's hard to track that in such increments. Jumping between clients is super difficult. Yeah, you have to know the tools that are going to work for you. You have to know the systems that are going to work for you. You got to figure all of that out for yourself because what works for one person might not work for another
Yeah,
person.
and exactly. It's not a one size fits all. And that's a mistake I think a lot of people have is like, well, this technique worked for this person. And that's why, like, I'm an author and I love books, but I'm going to tell you one thing that, not every system is going to work for everybody. Not every approach is going to work for everybody. So what at the end of the day, you have to do what works for you. And you may have to do a lot of trial and error and say, okay, you know what, if I have all this stuff happening, how can I, maintain a system where like maybe I'm wor- working 3 minutes on this task and then, working on this task because it's one thing about another myth about human performance is there's no such thing as multitasking. So if you're working on two things at one time, that's not gonna happen. It's not gonna work. It's best to do 5 minutes here if you have to take a break, then 5 minutes on this project, because therefore you're 100% focused on that specific task.
Mhm.
So it's more about task switching than multitasking. Like, okay, 5, 10 minutes to work on this, I'm gonna work on this, and then I'm gonna take a break. And then,
Yeah.
even if it's 5 minute break to reset, recharge, and then I'm gonna come back and I'll work, on this amount of time on this project. But whatever you're working on, make that your sole focus at that moment. Because if you notice, one of the things, and I, kind of, been working on this on myself too, is when you have so many things open, that's another thing you'll never get anything done.
I won't tell you how many
Because
tabs I
if
have
you,
open right now.
oh no, I was about to say that I probably have everybody on this and this audience beat on the amount of tabs. I've had to really start covering and cutting it down because I was noticing I wasn't getting anything done.
Yeah.
The important and the rule of thumb I heard from productivity experts, and again, or transition with a grain of salt, but 3 to 5 tabs maximum at a time. Bookmark the rest
Mhm.
because we only have a chance to, you can always close and reopen and close and reopen because when it's better to be productive and that'll also raise your confidence more when you start to complete things.
Yeah. 6 tabs, but 1 is this stream. I mean, the stream doesn't count. The stream doesn't count as a tab, it's fine.
Yeah, six, yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
Seven,
yeah, yeah.
8 now.
No, that's fine.
Um, yeah. I remember one time, and I'm calling myself out on this, but it was like I had 82 tabs open. I'm like, no. I'm like, and if you look at it, like I think even Chrome was probably saying enough.
Yes.
You know, and the truth of the matter is that most of these tabs, honestly, I wasn't really looking at. And that's where I'm like, that's where like when I learned about the 3 to 5 tab rule, it makes perfect sense because that's all you're really focusing on at the moment. The rest you bookmark. Or there's a nice Chrome tool for anybody who uses Chrome called One Tab. which actually organizes each work session that you have, the tab that when you close it out, so it will save the tabs that you have. And this
Oh,
way you can just click on the
interesting.
extension that you just click on the extension and there opens a tab. And so you're not losing out because there's sometimes a fear of missing out, or what we call FOMO, or if I close this tab, I'm not going to have it. Oh no.
Yeah.
But not if you have it in one tab or in your favorites, it's still there. It's just you're not overwhelmed. Because the
Hmm.
one thing about human performance, when we have too many choices or too many options, we get nothing done.
Mm.
Now you may think it's the actual opposite. It's like a paradox. When you have too many choices, because like if you have like for example, like I have a lot of books on my bookshelf that are not open yet. I have to make a commitment to read a certain book at a certain time. Because if I stare at this and say, "What am I going to read next?" I'll be going through for an hour or two later, and I have nothing read.
Yeah.
So I think the whole idea here is to be intentional. Do one thing at a time,
Hmm.
or even two things at a time, but make sure you do them separately, not together. Like, don't be, writing a report and checking your email at the same time.
Yeah.
Again, um, and most of the time it's an addiction. A lot of times with tabs and all of that and social media, it's an addiction. It's dopamine. It's your email. Unless you're like really important business decision, most of the time you can get away with a half hour without checking your email. You can get away with not
Yeah.
checking your social media for an hour. So, because a lot of times people will have tabs with they'll have like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok open, and they're trying to do work at the same time. Not gonna happen. I can tell
Hmm.
you that right now. And I'm speaking from experience. You have to close it out.
Yeah.
And then on your break, open up the apps and look, and then close the apps and go back to doing what you're doing. Um, Keep in mind that even with Chrome or with Facebook and Instagram, it's designed to keep you focused on the
Yes.
site. It'll give you that illusion you need to have this open. Newsflash, you don't need to have those open, and that all the time. And that's gonna be a thing because and how many times I've been guilty of this too, doom scrolling, where you just sit and scroll on your phone. And I'd be sometimes laying in bed, like in the morning. Sometimes I'm like, wait, a half hour just went by, and I got nothing done because I'm scrolling. And so that's when I realized, okay, this is my dopamine, being hijacked.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the
And
biggest changes that I hated that TikTok made was whenever you hit that back button twice, instead of closing the app, now it just opens up the first video. It scrolls back and opens up the first video. And I can't
yeah,
stand that because it's just like, "Oh, wait, what I don't wanna miss this." I wanna get some of these comments in the chat too because I definitely know that multi-half-assing, which is what I love to call it, and my kids hate it when I call it that, but it's not multitasking, it is, it's multi-half-assing, but it's a struggle. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to be in a meeting and you have to have your email open because you're looking for a big project. We have several major government clients, and they're putting out new things every day, and it's like in our company, especially right now, the culture is not the best that it could be. And right now, it's like the first one to notify gets the credit. And so, by nature, our team has to be constantly on our email and on those message boards, even when we're in a major meeting that we're supposed to be paying attention to and taking notes for and providing input to, and sometimes even leading. We still have to have all those things open. And it's such a bummer, but it can be a product of your workplace. It can be a product of your environment. And I totally get that. And I don't want to discount that. You got to do what you can where you can. I know there are different tools. I started recently using videos and making videos where it's 30 minutes of music and then it audibly cuts the music off for 10 minutes. And it's just like a reminder of I can put it on in the background. I don't have to pay attention to it, but it gives me that, oh, why did the music stop? Even if I don't notice for 2 minutes, it's a 10-minute audible break of why did the music stop? I haven't gotten up in 30 minutes. I need to get up. I need to drink some water. I need to stretch a little bit. You got to
yeah,
find things that work for you. And for some people, they can't listen to music. I can't listen to music with words if I'm trying to write. I can listen to music
mhm,
without words when I'm trying to write. And I actually do better if I'm listening to music with words when I'm reviewing things. So it just
Yeah.
depends on what works for you. And you can't say, don't listen to music with words because that will, it just depends,
No.
you know?
I know people. I know a lot of people that cannot work without music if there's nothing.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
uncomfortable when there's quiet and stillness. So, what I would say, even in that situation, find a system works for you if you have to be on your email.
Yeah.
Don't be reading your email and trying to do a presentation at the same time and have your eyes, because then you're going to slip and you're going to start. People are going to notice in the room that you're not focused,
Yeah. Yep. For sure.
and that's going to be a big thing too. So,
Yeah. All
but
right.
I would definitely say one thing at a time. Yes.
Yeah. So a couple of these comments from the chat. I tried Clockify with Steam Deck integration. Sadly, that falls flat. I'm not sure what Clockify is, so I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah,
Most
so I don't know
definitely.
about it.
Yeah. And then Control H only goes so far. I have for sure gotten to the point on my phone, especially where it's like, you can't open a new tab until you close some old ones. I'm sorry, but 99 is the max. And then I go, oh,
Yeah.
why do I have 99 tabs open? Most of the time, it's stuff that I don't need anymore. It is hard for me to
Yeah.
close tabs, though. It's really hard for me to close tabs. I do get that feeling of like, but wait, I have to, I have to have that open or I'll
But wait,
forget what I was doing. Well, I've already forgot what I was doing. Yeah, yeah. I'll check out that Chrome one for sure. Oh, choice paralysis. Yeah, going back to like the book picks. Dopamine is
yeah,
the first world's favorite drug. Yes, most definitely. Sadly, not always that simple based upon exceptions of the employer or expectations of the employer. Totally get it. And that's what I was saying. It's just like
yeah.
sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and it can be really, really difficult. Most of the time it's really difficult. My Safari tabs are maxed out because I basically treat them as bookmarks. Yeah, yeah. I mean, clearly, it's not just Albert, it's not just me that struggle with this. This is clearly a very
No, we
common
all do.
thing that people struggle with.
I think everybody deals with this because it's just that fear of missing out, the FOMO,
Yeah.
fear of missing out, and I need to have everything there, and you don't. But the thing is that unfortunately can hold you back from being productive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When you even mentally too. I mean, you could also be like this tabbed out mental, or it's like,
Mm.
whoa, that's way too many tabs on, and therefore that paralysis means that we're not gonna do anything now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I won't expect when I'm on the game tomorrow during work hours that Blue Bedlam's going to call me out and say, "Are you multitasking?" Because yeah, I am.
Yeah, yeah.
Most definitely. NATO Shido, absolutely. If you want to give some subs, those are absolutely welcome, and I would be honored. But you do not feel like you need to spend your money here. If you have something better, you could spend it on. That is also okay. But of course, I can't call you out if I'm also multitasking. Well, you could. I'll just call you out. I'll just call you out back the other way. That's all. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for your support. I really appreciate it. My plate is full or I'm all out of spoons. Yes. Yeah. Sometimes you can be out of spoons. And sometimes you can be too full of forks. I don't know if y'all have heard that term as well, but the spoons one is something that I think a lot of people are familiar with. But the forks, it's like if you've had too many things piled onto you in a day, that can also really contribute. So it's not that you're out of
Oh, yeah.
things to give, it's that you've taken too many things in, which is a whole other thing. So getting back to the that's not a word, self-sabotage piece of this, what are some small practical steps folks could try today if they notice themselves spiraling into that self-sabotage?
I think, well, the important thing is to have insight, because that's a very important thing. Because most people, when they're spiraling in self sabotage, have no knowledge of that. It's not a conscious thing. It's sort of go, hey, I'm self sabotaging today. We don't realize you're doing that. So I think if I would say great, bravo, first step to acknowledge that you're doing that. The next thing is to kind of start to figure out what are you afraid of, or what are you hiding from, or what do you think is, preventing you from moving forward? Is it the fear of change? Is it, stepping outside your comfort zone? Is it maybe fear of success? Are you afraid of necessarily the change of identity? I talk a lot of this in my book too. What's your relationship with money? Are you know, how do you view money? Do you feel you're worthy of money? Do you feel you're worthy of being, successful in a sense? So that's a big thing too. Like, where's your work? coming in. Where do you see yourself and how do you see yourself? So all of those factors too would require self-reflection, maybe require a good coach even sometimes
Mm,
that can help you through this and talk you through this.
yeah. I think asking for help and seeking out that help is such a big thing that, sometimes people wait until it's feels really just end of the world for them to reach out and get that help. But even if you feel
Mhm,
like, "Oh, I'm procrastinating a lot. I don't know what to do," reaching out for some help, that's a huge thing
mhm,
that you can do. It's so big and it gets discounted a lot because it's like, "Oh, I'm not to the point where I need help yet." And it's like,
mhm.
"Yeah, you could get help though."
Yeah, and that's the whole thing too. It's about learning to ask for help and knowing that seeking help is not a sign of weakness. It
Yeah.
actually is a sign of
Yeah.
strength. It's a sign of strength and courage to be able to sometimes say, "Hey, I need help here." Or we're a collective cult, as society, we're social animals. We're meant to be in communication with each other. We're meant to be collaborating with each other. So I think it's great, if you can ask for help, be comfortable with asking for help.
Yeah. Yeah. Nato Shida says, I've honestly felt broken for several years due to my marriage falling apart. I've started therapy recently, but it's hard, honestly. I have been there. The name of my podcast is Even Tacos Fall Apart for a reason, because even though things can feel like they're falling apart around you, you've got a whole community that we've built up that is there to support you.
Mhm,
And also, you're still absolutely lovable and still worthy of love. And I have had marriage fall apart, and looking back now on the other side of it, I'm so glad. But it's hard to say that when you're in that right there. I'm on my third therapist, and the first two mocked me as being weak. You know what? If you don't like your therapist, you absolutely need to fire them and find a new one. And it sounds like you've
yeah,
done just that.
and therapists are not, are human. So, and I would have to say, if anybody who says that calls you weak is projection, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
where maybe they're, have, do their own work. Because therapists are human beings too. So
Yeah.
most of the time they're, in the field of becoming therapists because they themselves, have their own issues that they work through. I don't know the situation that you were in, whoever said that about, but I can almost guarantee you that problem, if that was said accurately, you say that therapist needs to work on their own
Yes.
internal, clear out some things too of their own to be able to project that onto somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. How does imposter syndrome fit into this conversation, and why does imposter syndrome hit teachers and creatives in particular so hard?
Well, imposter syndrome really is all about, the textbook definition you feeling you're fraud. And a lot of times when you don't see necessarily the right outcome, because as a teacher and educator, you really don't know the impact you're going to have. Because a lot of times, sometimes it may not really take effect till years later. So when the students are already out of the classroom or out of your classroom. So you may not, it's almost considered like a thankless profession to some level
Yeah.
because you don't really get that thank you. Now, sometimes you do, but most of the time you're not. And most of the time, you're not going to know if you made a difference. Even though the people you have made a difference in, they may not know that. There's a lot of people, like even with this podcast, you may have a lot of listeners. Now, obviously, some are engaging with you in Discord chat, but you never know. We may be impacting listeners that you'll never hear from,
Yep.
and you don't know that. And so sometimes when we don't see a return right away, we think, okay, I'm a failure. I stink, and I'm not going to do this because nobody is responding to me. And the same thing goes. I don't have the measurable outcomes. I don't have the students thanking me. So therefore, am I doing the right thing? Am I really dying to be a teacher? Am I, and then you start having these racing thoughts like, well, maybe I am a failure. Maybe I am people are going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. And that can happen. And the same thing with like artists. It's like, especially if you're an actor who hasn't had a job in a long time, it can start to, am I
Mm,
doing the right thing? Am I in the right profession? Am I really good at?
yeah. And am I an actor if I haven't acted in so long?
Yes.
I know, especially for teachers and content creators as well, and musicians and everything, I know that the smallest message, and I know this from my own personal experience and also now the experience of my oldest who just had something happen to him over the weekend where someone reached out to him and was like, "Hey, I miss having you in the classroom." And it's just the smallest message can make the biggest difference. So, on the heels of what Albert was just talking about, if you have someone who has impacted you, just send them a quick note and say, "Hey, I love what you're doing." That tiny little
Yeah,
message can take that person and make them feel like they are doing something that is valuable, that is worth it for a year. It's crazy.
yeah, and you never know, even a good job or telling somebody that their message
Mhm.
was important to resonate may be the biggest confidence boost you'll ever, give to somebody
Yeah.
who maybe, 'cause you don't know, some people are very close to giving up because, again, and I'll use even the example of content creation. There's a lot of times, I've done this too, where I'll make a post and I don't get a response, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking, "Okay, did this stink? Did this not land?" And then maybe a month later, somebody said, "Oh, I love this post you made," and I'm like, "But I never heard from you or didn't get any of that, likes or comments." But yet now I know, so you never know, and that's why, like, we have to just keep going
Yeah.
and keep no matter what metrics we are experiencing short term, is to just keep going and be consistent.
Mhm.
Because even if you reach 1 or 2 people and change their lives, that's worth it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Coyote says, "I'm a man and it took me years to get over my 10-year relationship." And that's fair. No matter how long it takes you to work through things after they end. So I was personally, I don't know how much y'all know about my story, but I was in an abusive marriage and I still had moments of like, I'm sad that it ended. I had to go through that grieving process because it's something that you're in for
Yes.
so long, even if it's an unhealthy situation. So even if you were in something that was a healthy situation, you're gonna grieve when it ends, and it's okay to grieve when it ends. It's okay to have to work through some shit whenever something that long ends, or even if it was a shorter relationship, even if it was just a year, even if it was only 6
Yeah.
months. There's still things that you're gonna have to work on, and that's okay. It's okay to need to work on yourself, and it's okay to need to heal, and it's okay to need some time to do that. You're not gonna be in a situation where you're better, quote unquote, overnight. That's not how life goes.
Yeah. And there's no set rule. Everybody
Mhm.
grieves and mourns in a different way. And yes, when anything, we don't just grieve when somebody dies, we grieve when things end.
Yeah.
It's all about how we deal with that. And a 10-year relationship is a long time.
Yep.
Because I know the person said, it there's a lot of your identity is gone, your
Yep.
shared experiences, and there's also that adjustment of dealing with being single again, and that identity shift,
Mhm.
is there. So it's gonna take time, and you shouldn't rush it either,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, a lot of times some people make, especially if they're insecure, is sometimes they'll bounce from relationship to relationship, they have to get into another one. And very often you're gonna get into really bad situations, rebalance situations.
Yeah. 5 steps is a great idea, but honestly, you can loop back to each step of the grieving process. Yeah, yes, the 5 steps of grieving. Yeah, that's not linear. Healing in general is not linear. Grieving is not linear.
Grieving, the 5 steps, is important, and I approach Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross for that. That's a really good model, but I'll be honest with you, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
It's not linear at all. Yeah. You could get all the way to step 5 acceptance, and the next day be back to anger or depression again, and it's okay to be that
Mhm.
way. That's the important thing because I think a lot of times when it comes to any type of grieving, we don't want to experience it because it's scary to go
Yeah.
through these feelings. But the only way through it, the only way to kind of work with is to work with it. You got to go through it. And what I would say is let it take as long, when some people, how long that, as long as you need it to be.
Yeah.
You know, as long as you know yourself. And now if you meet somebody and they make you happy, then go for it. But don't rush it.
Yeah.
If you're not ready, don't rush it. And that's what I would tell someone who says that, you know, take your time.
Yep. And I'll tell you from my experience, I filed for divorce in 2019. I started trying to make a safety plan to leave in 2018. I knew it was over in like 2017. And it's still, I didn't start dating until really a couple years ago. And that's
Hmm.
okay. Like, it's okay to take that time for yourself, but it's also okay whenever you do find someone who just lights your world up to take that jump as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah. Well, and that's fine, and take whatever time you need, and there's no set time, and I think that's a dangerous zone that we go into is when we say, okay, well, if I've been in this, I must be in this time. No, some people take longer than ever. You have to be respectful for yourself and know yourself,
Yeah.
and be gentle and self, you know, really just love yourself, and that's
Mhm.
the important.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen this video, but this is one that really gets me of just like forward progress. There's and I wish I knew the name of the guy. I wish I knew the name of it's an art installation, but there's a set of stairs and there's a trampoline next to it. And the guy goes up a couple steps and then falls over onto the trampoline and jumps up on a step down. And he goes up a couple steps and he falls down on the trampoline and he jumps back up and he's a step down. And he'll go like 3 or 4 steps up and he'll go 5 or 6 steps back. And it's just like eventually he gets to where he's at the top of that platform, and what they're trying to simulate was just the grieving process of like some days you're going to wake up and you're going to feel great, some days you're going to make progress, some days you're going to feel like you're going back. No
Yeah.
matter what you're doing, if you are, I love that coyote, I'm going to steal that right now, if you are restarting living every day, I think that that's really something that you just have to look at is like treat yourself with that kindness every day, no matter what that day looks like. Coyote said, I'm talking to my therapist weekly and I'm restarting living. And I love that. I just stole it on the fly.
Yeah, no, I like that too, restarting living, but, absolutely, and take the time that you need,
Yeah.
and, it's really just about self-care and self-love, and, yeah, you're gonna move there's gonna be days that are gonna be harder than others, and days that are easier than others, and
Yes.
there's no right or wrong way to go through it. I guess the only time would be, like, when you try to deny it or try to push it through to you. Like, even whether it's tragedy or breakup, I'm more worried about the person who seems to have it together
Mm,
than about the person who's distraught or messed, emotionally, what you call a wreck. I'm more concerned about the person who seems a little too together
yeah.
because I feel like eventually that's denial talking, and then eventually that denial is gonna fade, and that's when a real pain is gonna happen.
Yeah. Well, it could be a mask too. Like I was that person who really looked like on the outside had it all together. On the inside, I was depressed as fuck. So like it could just be an
Yeah,
absolute mask. And I was a little
it's
bit in denial, but yeah, it could be denial, it could be a mask. There's
it's smiling on the outside, crying on the inside.
yeah.
And as long as you're respectful to yourself, but even so, that can be a mask and that can be harmful too,
Mhm.
because you're not being really authentic. You're trying to be maybe somebody you're not, or trying to be a front or trying to appear too strong,
Yeah,
and you need to be compassionate about yourself too.
most definitely. Now, you use hypnosis and NLP in your work. For listeners who may not be familiar with those, what are those tools and how do they help with anxiety and confidence?
Well, NLP stands for neuro linguistic program, and that means like using language and the nervous system to kind of rewire your thoughts, change your beliefs, and even eventually change your behavior. It can work well with anxiety because it'll start to challenge, your beliefs even on the subconscious level of what creates an anxiety and changing that program. So, like maybe you had overbearing parents growing up, or not, or neglectful parents that kind of added to your own belief. So it's kind of like changing that perception of that, even your perception of your past, so that we can't change what happened, but most of life really, and this is gonna sound like a Hallmark card, but most of your life is not so much what happened to you, but it's what's the relationship that you have to what happened. That's important.
Mhm.
So we can change that. your relationship to what happened or your story about what happened. And that can be a major breakthrough when it comes to anxiety. Working with anxiety, working through trauma is making it neutral, not making it less emotionally charged.
Yeah. Do you recommend hypnosis and NLP is that just like a blanket recommendation? Are there some cases where it wouldn't be appropriate or wouldn't be helpful?
Well, I would definitely say if it's like a deep seated addiction, like to drugs, alcohol, or some type of really deep seated mental uh, or personality disorder, then I would say definitely a therapist first,
Yeah.
or at least in conjunction with the therapist that you can go to a hypnotist or an NLP practitioner. But it's good for everybody. But I would definitely say there are, again, if there's deep seated issues, and you probably might need a psychologist first.
Mm-hmm.
That or trauma therapist, or at least somebody who's trained in trauma, because there are a lot of hypnotherapists who are trained in trauma. If you have issues with trauma, I wouldn't go to just the ordinary hypnotist. I would find someone who specializes in trauma.
Yeah. That's a fair recommendation.
Yes, absolutely. And also, even though, hypnosis is good for pain control, if you're, wanting to go to hypnotist for pain, the first thing I would want you to do is to make sure that there's no medical reason for the pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the real reason for pain really is to warn us that something is wrong or something
Mm-hmm.
needs attention to. So usually when somebody comes with chronic or pain, most hypnotists are going to ask for a doctor's note because we want to make sure that you're under the care of a doctor. Because even though, let's say you come for migraines, if you don't get that checked, that could be something that can be building up that can be catastrophic, that you ignored, and that really the pain in your head was a warning something to get it checked out. So we want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to always know what's going on with your body anyway, right? Like it's
Mhm.
good to get those regular checkups and just make sure that you're paying attention to every part of yourself, mental health, physical health, emotional well-being, all of it.
Correctly.
If someone listening today is caught in that cycle of anxiety or self-sabotage, what's one thing you'd want them to remember after this conversation?
Well, I would say that you are enough, that you're in this and that there's a way to do better, and to really just know that you are worthy and that you are deserving of all of that. And so that's the biggest thing. A lot of people are walking around thinking they're not worthy and that they don't deserve to be here. So, that's really what it would come down to. They're worthy of that.
Yep. I like that because I think everyone needs that reminder too.
And we have all the answers we need. And a lot of times we're equipped as human beings to really have all the wisdom we need. A lot of times we just get a little bit astray or like led elsewhere.
Coyote has a question in the chat. It says, where is the break between I should get treated for trauma or I just have to live with it? Where's that distinction?
If it's bothering you, are you having nightmares? Are you having trouble concentrating? Are you, experiencing bouts of depression? Are you experiencing flashbacks? And that's where, can you talk about the traumatic event as being in a very neutral way, as if what you just ate for breakfast last week? And if the answer to that, any of that is no, then, I would definitely go talk to somebody.
Yeah. And I agree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because it took me years to be able to talk about my trauma the way that I do. And there's
Mhm.
only one or two aspects of my trauma that I still am like, when I start talking about it, I am not okay. And those are just very deep-seated traumatic things. And it's like, yeah, it's still shit that I'm having to work through. And
Yeah,
the rest of it is like, I did the work. I put in the work, and I can look back and I can really talk about it. I can really
yeah,
learn from it. I see what I went through. I see what I had to deal with afterwards. Like I can examine it without falling to pieces. And it took me
and
years to get
it
there.
it can, and especially for the deep-seated trauma, or even something multiple traumas too,
Hmm.
because very often what can happen is that, let's say, for unresolved trauma, any new trauma is now gonna bring back and intensify because the old traumas come back. Like, I will use this example a lot, during 2020, during COVID. a lot of people were having such a hard time during this year. Some people that were okay, but then some people were such having a hard time with the, impending doom,
Mhm.
the fear that was happening. Because what was also happening is, yes, that was a trauma for everybody. 2020 was a traumatic year for
Yes.
everyone on the planet. But if you are also dealing with other traumas in your life that weren't resolved, 2020 just became a whole lot worse for you.
Yep.
And that was one thing that was hard about 2020 because, everyone, okay, stay safe and stay home and all that, great. But a lot of people were not doing okay by staying home.
Yeah.
And having a hard, and that's how we saw a high rate of substance abuse, alcoholism, drug use, even domestic violence, because you're now trapped at home with this person. So, it was definitely a tough thing, but I would definitely say that, really, like, if you find yourself getting emotionally charged up talking about something, that's an indication you need more work done on
Yeah.
that issue. And it's okay, but that's something that you would have to work through. And that's the whole thing. I think a danger zone to be in is, again, thinking that you just have to live with it.
Right.
Yes, the events, because of your past, will not, it happened, but the emotional charge of it should not be something you have to live with.
Yeah. NATO, she just says talking it out is worth the cost in comparison to just dealing with it. I absolutely agree with that. That being said, I'm definitely not an expert, but talking to someone is worth it. And feel free to try more than one therapist. I will maintain if your therapist is not serving you, then you need to fire them and get a new therapist. That has been one of the things
Oh,
I have
that's
said from the very beginning. Yep. Yep.
And you may need to go through several,
Yes.
before you find the right one. It has to be a good fit. And again, that's the only way you're gonna reach breakthrough, because the first thing, in order to really reach breakthrough, you have to be comfortable and have a rapport with your therapist.
Yes. Yeah.
And, just seeing one, again, it may not be the right fit for you.
Yep. And my first experience with a therapist was actually really terrible. And I went to her 5 times because that's what was covered by my EAP. And after that, I stopped going to therapy for more than a year. And I am really glad that I went back and found a different therapist. And because she and I, like you said, we had that trust, we built that rapport, and we really were able to make some breakthroughs. And whenever I was able to, with her, identify that I was in an abusive relationship, she literally got out of her chair and cheered me on whenever I
Yeah.
finally named that for myself. And it was because we had done the work together and had really just kind of gotten to the point where she knew me well enough and I didn't know her. Like you don't really get to know your therapist very well, but I knew that she was in my corner. I knew her well enough to know she was in my corner. And the first
And
therapist that I went to, I don't think was in my corner at all.
hey, I mean, that's sometimes happens, but really the idea for therapy is it's not meant to be long, like, forever. It's not meant to be forever. And ultimately, we want people to, speaking as a therapist and coach myself, we want people to move on. Like, I'd be in a great spot if somebody says, "Look, I don't need you anymore." Great,
Yeah.
perfect. You can now be your own therapist.
Yeah.
So you don't need me anymore. And that's great, because you don't want to have a dependent,
Yeah.
permanently.
Yeah. That's the goal. I will say with therapy though, I do kind of think it's great to treat it as like a dentist. You go in once or twice a year and just do like, hey, I just wanted to check in. Just wanted to check in
Yeah.
and if you with the either with the same therapist or with a different therapist, whatever. But I think it's great to do just a
Sure.
check in.
Yeah. Well, and the important thing is we're human beings. Even therapists have their own therapists. And we need that accountability sometimes, or even coaches. Even some of the high achieving coaches have their own coaches that they kind of can be vulnerable with, and because that's human being. It's part about being a human being.
Yeah.
We're not perfect.
Offending dentist. Okay, did I say once or twice a year? Because I think you're supposed to go every like 6 months to the dentist or something like that. I don't.
Twice a year, at least. Yeah.
I go like every 5 years. I hate the dentist with a passion of 1,000 suns. But that is my own personal thing. And I make my kids go to the dentist. So, you know, there's that.
Yeah.
I just don't
That's
go, just don't
they
go
don't
myself.
get done.
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. Blue Bedlam
Right.
says, I have some really old traumas that are pretty settled, but sometimes I can still feel them echoing through newer ones. And I agree with that because I've had some stuff that has happened in my life where something else will happen and I'll be like, ooh, this feels like that. And I hate that so much. So it can catch you really off guard too. And sometimes I have to step back and go, whoa, why am I feeling this way right now? And I have to really think about, oh, because it reminds me of this. That's why I've got this
Yeah.
feeling in my body, that's why I've got these thoughts in my head because it reminds me of this and I hadn't connected that. Once you make that connection, though, I've found for myself, if I'm able to make that connection, I can look at it a lot more
Yeah.
clear-headedly. I'm sure there's a better word for that.
Yeah. Well, not only that, just clear-headedly, that now it doesn't affect you as
Yeah,
much,
yeah,
because now you know, and what really is all about is that they're just thoughts.
mm,
That's all.
yeah,
They're not. That's all they are. And eventually, when you start to see it like that, doesn't mean you have to hold on to it. It's just a thought. You
yep.
can let it go.
99 out of 10 dentists recommend MommaFoxFire. Yes,
All right.
that's right. So Bite Mark sent this question in ahead of time. She could not be here tonight, but she would love to know, what is your favorite poem?
Interesting. And I'll be totally transparent. I'm not really a poetry person, but I would have to say, hmm, there's a poem online called "Roses for Rose." Look that up when read that. But that would be my favorite. It's a little heavy.
And what's it called?
I was always "Roses for Rose."
Roses for
For
Roads?
Rose.
Okay.
For Rose. Like Rose is the name.
Oh, okay.
So it's like an
Oh, yeah, yeah.
oxymoron.
Okay,
Rose is
yes.
the name.
Got it. Okay, I'll have to look that one up because I'm not familiar with that. Although it sounds familiar. So I'll have to look
Well,
that one up
it
and
was
find it.
pretty much like in the late '90s. It was like a very popular one that was going around.
Mm,
So it definitely is. It's definitely an emotional one. It's not an easy read. It's an emotional one. So
yeah.
just want to forewarn everybody if you're going to check that out. So
Gotcha. Yeah. All right, I'll have to find that one because I'm not immediately seeing it, but that's okay. What is your favorite life hack?
I mean, I guess just NLP. Really, if you think
Mm,
about it, being able to know that we can change, and change our belief system. So that would be the major thing. Visualization is a very powerful one.
mm.
Because when you visualize something, your brain does not know the difference between fiction and reality.
All right, well, it is time for the magic moment. And for those who have been here before, you know that this signals kind of the end of the official question. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, make sure you pop those into the chat and we'll make sure to address them while we're here. But Albert, if you could wave a magic wand and eliminate one common opinion or misconception surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health, what would it be?
The major misconception is that people are mentally ill are crazy.
Mm,
And I think that's the biggest danger of the misconception. Most people think that mental illness people are foaming at the mouth and because of what they see in TV and movies. But I would say 90% of people with mental illness are normal, everyday working professionals.
yeah,
So that was the biggest thing is the stereotype
yeah,
of that the mentally ill people are crazy. And they're not.
yeah. And I'll add in there to that 1 in 5 people will experience a mental illness, a diagnosable level of mental illness every single year. And when you expand that over someone's lifetime, it's 1 in 2. So the chances
Oh,
are
I
you'll
respect
experience
that.
something at some point. Yeah. You or someone you absolutely love with all your heart will experience something.
I mean, depression and anxiety are considered mental illness. I think everybody in this planet has experienced depression at one point, anxiety at one point.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yep. Well, I will post your socials one more time so that if folks would like to connect with you, they can go ahead and do that. And Albert, I'll just turn it over to you. If there's anything we didn't get to talk about or anything you want to throw out there as far as resources or anything to promote, I'll just let you do that while I post these links.
Well, I definitely encourage you to check out my book, Rise Above the Script, and it's available again as audiobook, a Kindle or paperback. And also check out my website, albertbramante.com, because I have a lot of hypnosis audios on there, programs for all different issues from addictions to confidence to sleep. And I would really definitely encourage you to check out one of those programs out. And, feel free to follow me on socials and get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. The link for the website is right there in the chat for you. It's albertbramante.com. And the audiobook is the audiobook on the website as well.
You can, or just go to Amazon. I think I put that in my link tree. So definitely
Perfect.
look that up. On
Cool. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so very much, Albert. This was a true pleasure to have you on here. I am really, really grateful that you were able to take the time and join us, and everybody who is here in chat and asking questions and engaging. Thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this community. I really appreciate you guys. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So that was Dr. Albert Bramante talking about self-sabotage, anxiety, and why we're all so good at getting in our own way. I want to come back to something that we talked about. Albert talked about how your brain doesn't know the difference between stage fright and excitement. How many times have we told ourselves a story about what we're feeling, and then that story became the reality? You feel your heart racing before you have to do something, and you immediately jump to, I'm terrified this is going to be a disaster. But what if those same physical sensations just meant you were excited? What if the only difference was the narrative you chose? That's not some positive thinking nonsense. That's actually understanding how your nervous system works and not letting your brain bully you into believing you're more scared than you actually are. The other thing that keeps coming back to me is what he said about procrastination and perfectionism being two sides of the same coin. I felt personally called out on that one. How many projects have I not started because I convinced myself I needed to do more research first? How many things have I half finished because if I never complete them, they can't be judged? And here's the brutal truth. Every year you spend in the same place, stuck in the same patterns, is a year you don't get back. Albert mentioned doing an annual inventory to see if you've moved forward at all. That's uncomfortable to think about, but it's necessary. Because self-sabotage is comfortable. It keeps you safe. It protects you from failure by making sure you never really try. But it also protects you from success, from growth, from becoming whoever you're supposed to become. I also want to highlight what we were saying about therapy and finding the right fit. If your therapist isn't serving you, fire them and find a new one. You're not being difficult, you're not being picky, you're trying to heal, and that requires someone who's actually in your corner. It took me multiple tries to find a therapist who got me, and then that one changed my life. One more thing before we wrap up. Progress isn't a straight line. Some days you're going to feel like you've got it all figured out. Some days you're going to feel like you're starting over from scratch. Both of those days are part of the process. If you got something out of this episode, I'd love it if you could leave a review or a comment wherever you're listening right now or wherever you get your podcasts. Those things actually help other people find the show, and honestly, they help me know what's landing with you and what isn't. You can also follow the show so you don't miss new episodes. We do these Mental Health Monday conversations every week live on YouTube and Twitch, and we cover everything from ADHD to trauma to just trying to be a functional human being in a world that makes that really hard sometimes. You can find ways to connect with Dr. Albert Bramante in the show notes. He's got hypnosis programs, resources, and his book, Rise Above the Script, which is also available as an audiobook. And look, if you're listening to this and you're stuck in your own patterns of self-sabotage, if you're tired and overwhelmed and not sure how to move forward, just remember, you are enough. You are worthy. You deserve to be happy and successful and fulfilled. Those aren't just nice words. That is the truth. And sometimes the hardest work we do is convincing ourselves to believe it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this community. And remember, even tacos fall apart sometimes, but that doesn't mean they're not still delicious, still valuable, still exactly what someone needs. Until next time, take care of yourselves.